Okay, welcome everybody to today's Esports Research Colloquium. It's been a while. My name is Oliver Leis, and I'm more than excited to welcome Urszula Klimczak and Summer Scott for today's Q&A session on the role of performance coaches in esports. And without further ado, I would like to start right into the session and ask you, Summer, to briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Summer Scott. I am currently a performance consultant and formerly with the now defunct Counter Logic Gaming. I operated there for about 5 years, first as a performance coach, then as head of player development, and finally as the director of team operations. That's me.
Thank you. And you, Urszula?
So my name is Urszula. I have been working in eSport as a performance coach for it's almost 10 years. Right now, I am working with ENCE as a head of players development. And yeah, and greetings from Cologne.
Thank you. I'm really excited to have this chat, and if the audience has questions, please let me know. Post the questions in the chat or send me a message and I will forward those questions to the speakers. And my first question, in fact, would be, what is a performance coach? Is there someone who wants to start with this question? Maybe someone.
Ula, you go.
So performance coach is a type of a role that is very popular in sports, but also in esports. Is a type of a person that is managing everything outside of the competition itself. So if it comes to teams, we manage mood, we manage vibes, we manage routines. We help players and teams to perform better, and we just try to teach them like how to find their own balance. But at the same time, everything outside of game that has an impact on the performance, which is these could be like private things. These could be conflicts inside of the teams. This could be, I don't know, wrong diet. This could be sleeping issues and so on and so forth. These are all the little aspects that have impact on the players themselves. Quite often, performance coaches are also sports psychologists. So that's the role where kind of we work very close with the players, and with Summer we've been working together for so many years, and we both know that working with the players is not only working purely on work aspects, but we also are kind of shoulders to cry. We are a kind of people that a player has like an always open door to come to and talk about, and at the same time we are like a bridge between the players and the org. But maybe Summer could cover a little bit in that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on that, simply put, I consider a performance coach problem solver. They have a real knack for being able to identify what's going on between people, and being able to not come up with the solution themselves, but really bring a more collaborative aspect into creating those solutions that work for everyone and really creating win-wins within the environment. An analogy I really like to use is that a lot of times within an organization, you already have your key pieces, right? You have the players that are turning as a cog, and you have your coaching as a cog and your management as a cog, but how are these being greased together? And the performance coach is really there to take these pieces that you have and help them run more smoothly. And it makes it a very fun, exciting, and diverse role, because you can imagine when you have all these different pieces, those interactions become really interesting and complicated, and, you know, a really fun thing to explore.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really like the description of a problem solver. And although I didn't want to ask the question at the beginning, also you touched on sports psychologists being also in the position of performance coaches. Would you agree to that, Summer, or maybe both of you can refer to my point? Is there a difference, or is there maybe also a benefit of sports psychologists being a performance coach?
I can take a stab at that. I mean, I don't think it necessitates that you have a performance psychology degree per se. I am someone who stepped into the role absent those types of credentials and have found a ton of success, mostly because I tend to be a forever learner. I'm constantly trying to take on new information with which to apply to novel situations. And sometimes the generalist really does help out an organization when they cannot actually afford a specialist. Like that piece is often overlooked, that like it requires a very robust investment to be able to have specialists in all your roles. So it's actually very helpful sometimes to have performance coaches coming in from alternative disciplines that can actually provide a more blanket service that is helpful for an organization. So it's always going to be dependent on what tier you're working with and what kind of budget an organization is working with. But yeah, I definitely think that there's merit in sports psychologists coming in. I've seen clinical psychologists take a stab and do really, really well. I just think it comes down to having the right skill set, knowing how to find the right information, and quite frankly, being a real people person, in the sense of not being a very like charismatic person per se, but really saying, I am the one who I'm going to dedicate myself, despite everybody else having independent roles, that I am dedicated to monitoring how people are doing. Like on a real level, on a real human level, how are you doing emotionally, physically, right? Because everybody else has their other jobs to do. So that's kind of how I see it. I mean, definitely value in sports psychologists, but many disciplines are also very valid in this role.
Yeah, and I'm coming from like a business psychology background, and so I started, without specifically psychology degree. Now I'm finishing a second master degree where I'm actually finishing sports psychology as a like a top up to what what I'm doing. But as Summer said, like the key in this role is to have that hunger to know better, to get to know like what works for people, to constantly educate yourself and to never lose interest for your players. Like that's the thing. Like the more you understand the players, the closer you're with them, the easier it is for you to kind of be successful at the job. And the success comes from like the natural passion. If you have the passion for what you do and nobody's forcing you and you just don't, take your time, but you just really are in the job, then yeah, then that's the like one of the keys for your success. So like always people that are very passionate, they always succeed in those roles. However, there were many situations where people were coming into straight from like the sport background. Like, they could not find themselves in esport because you also need to have a understanding that esport athletes are a little bit different than sport athletes, and at the same time I work with sport and esport, so I do see like how different approach it is, like how much you need to be like how much more you need to be flexible in the esport environment, and sometimes turn a blind eye to some of the stuff that in regular sport that would be like no go. So obviously we tend to focus on the same things, on maximizing people's performance, but at the same time you need to know that the people you work with, they're humans, they have their needs, they have their weak spots, and we all do. And at the same time, the more strict and the more like not natural you are with them, the more difficult the job for you would be.
I also want to point out something that Ula started to say, like it's really easy to get locked behind your credentials in the role for yourself and for the organization that hired you in ways that are not beneficial to you or anyone that you're trying to help. So what I mean by that is coming in as a support psychologist, but then kind of being in a situation where people won't tolerate your advice on anything else. Where they just do not consider you a good thinker, like they consider your expertise not valid in other areas, that can be really dangerous for your ability to actually serve. Another way is that the org might have hired you very specifically on like a credential, and that's what they expect to see, or they've seen other people with that credential execute upon the role in their fashion, but it doesn't necessarily meet how you best benefit a player. And like there's a really difficulty in communicating with your organization at that point, because there's a difference in expectations that people were assuming a lot based on a credential, where walking in just saying, I'm a performance coach, I think I can help you, actually goes a lot further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I really like your perspective on the whole performance coach, sports psychologist, or general roles in esports. And although there is a paper by Watson and colleagues highlighting that those are two different roles, sports psychologists and performance coaches, and they should or can work in parallel and complement each other's work, I think the reality in professional teams sometimes is different, because we only have one position that requires exactly what you just described, individuals focusing on the performance of individuals' well-being, as well as promoting personal and also in-game growth. So yeah, I really like what you did there. And you also touched on some obstacles, but I would like to start way at the beginning and ask you the question, how did you enter esports as a performance coach? So what were your first steps, and how come that your interest maybe in esports developed into having a position within the field? Maybe Summer, can you start?
Sure. It started with Ula.
Exactly.
Kind of kidding, but not really.
Oh.
So when I was finishing my undergraduate degree, I was trying to figure out what the next steps were for me. I really struggled to succeed in the traditional academic scene. I'm a person who really learns by experience best, and I'm not a very strong book learner per se. So I really wanted to figure out like what my next steps were, because I had only ever envisioned going and getting my master's in clinical psych. And that's when I started learning about esport. My husband actually got me into it. And at the time, there was like a featurette on LCS, and they were talking about someone who was applying sports psychology for their master's thesis in esport. And that got my wheels turning. I was just like, wait, I love gaming. I love psychology. Let's, interweave them and make something cool. And that's what actually launched me into it. And around that time, I literally just Googled esports psychologist and found a friend of Ula and mine's, Weldon Green, who had a blog. And I was like, hey, can I blog for you? Because I think I have some ideas. And that's where it all launched, and eventually became Ula, me, and an early group of esport performance coaches saying, hey, let's get together and start developing some programming that can help educate other coaches within the scene. And that eventually bridged into Weldon and I coming out to Los Angeles, doing a bunch of boot camps with teams. And slowly from there, the discipline itself within esport started to grow and evolve. So yeah, that's kind of like where I got the start. And from that consultancy was able to start getting some full-time jobs on teams.
Yeah, and on the side at the same time, like where Summer and Weldon, like we kind of created something like a unit called like Esports Coaching Network, and we were just like hanging around and just like trying to figure out, what to do, like how can we get our basically like back then like pretty new profession, how can we master it? What can we do more for the society? So we also were coaching. We're like just giving like a free coaching to some of the now famous coaches that were joining our programs, and they were learning like how to behave in a team, like what to do, like how to, I don't know, motivate the players, how to solve conflicts. So for us, it was just like sharing a knowledge project, whereas for some of the coaches, it was just a very valuable basic knowledge. And now they're successful in the esport world. So we could have that. We have little kids, running around the esport world that actually started something with us many, many years ago. But
I just want to jump off on that, in that we should talk about how many different disciplines were in that group, because we had Ula, who was in business psychology. We had somebody who was a sports psychologist for the military. We had a clinical psychologist in there. Weldon was a sports psychologist. Robert Yip, who's now on Immortals, he was sports psychology and physiology. So like we really wanted to get a broad understanding of all the different ways that you can possibly positively affect somebody's psyche, and from as many disciplines as have attempted to do so as possible.
Yep. And at the same time, it's just like having those young players that wanted to become coaches and so on, having them around and asking someone questions, it was just like triggering us, like, look how much knowledge is missing, look how much they need like education and those type of things. So that coaching network was something that was functioning for some time, but then we all get engaged in organizations, and actually during even doing the esports coaching network, we already had organizations, but then the more work was coming, the less time we had for that project. And it's actually sad that it died out because of lack of time, because it was just us volunteering to do things, and it was like totally non-profit. But then what happened was that we got busy with orgs, with own projects, and it kind of everyone went their own direction, because that was the time that performance coaching was really growing in esports, and the need for it was coming along with the success I think all of us had back then. So I mean, yeah, we all kind of still are in the environment, and we're still like working actively. So it was not just something that we could tell like appeared all of a sudden, but like the environment just created the need for someone that would help the players to master their abilities, not only in game, but like also outside of the game. So
And
yeah,
putting
that
into
was
context like the development of that project for those who want to understand how esport performance coaching kind of came to be. We were working on those things like what, 2015? Yeah. So like
I mean, I
we
started
that program.
2014, yeah, 14, 15, something like that. Yeah.
So we were starting those conversations like really early, and it wasn't until 2016, 2017 that you started full-time consultancies or all those boot camps that you might have heard of starting to go off, and people having more regularly to enhance performance. Like that happened like 2 years down the line. So a lot of that early processing to like make the role what it is today was happening because there was really awesome practitioners who were trying to get their heads together and figure out the solutions to these problems. I mostly know the history of like how it came to be for North America. I know we were more of a blended group because we had both EU and North American coaches working together. But as Ula said, like time really broke that apart. And I would also argue that the role itself became competitive.
Yeah, that's true.
Once I started getting on full-time teams, they considered me the secret sauce. So all of a sudden it became really like not cool for me to work with my colleagues and try to come up with stuff. And eventually I just started defying those orders because I knew for it to continue evolving and for us to be able to push the discipline forward, we needed to be communicating on a regular basis and starting to share notes on like what's succeeding and what's failing. But that's like a really interesting dynamic of how the role developed over time.
And I think in Europe it was like for the starting point, it was me, it was Isma. Lovely to have you, and once again, congrats on your championship. And it was Weldon, and Weldon was like traveling all over the world always. But like it was just us at the beginning, and then more people like Martina and so on, like more people started appearing, and yeah, and the hunger for the job was there, and it was mostly popular in League of Legends, but then with time also CS took over. So at some point it was difficult to kind of say what this job is about, like whether it's just about specializing yourself in one title, whether you can translate those things, how different the titles are. And then with time, at least it worked for me, like the more titles I was working around, the easier for me was to kind of find the key that actually was working for most of the teams. And don't get me wrong, it's not that you have a secret recipe that works for all the teams and you can just copy paste it. Every team is different, and you just need to enter it into the team and just match their needs at the same time. But the way you do it and the way you kind of introduce some of the stuff you do is mostly defined by your abilities to find the weaknesses in those team environments. So yeah.
Thank you very much for this broad and really satisfying answer. I didn't expect such a length response, but I really liked it. And I also liked how everything started with a blog.
That is how we got into esports.
Yeah,
so.
that is. And actually, funny thing is that also for Summer, her partner pushed her into esport, and with me, it was my partner that pushed me into esport. So you have like two nerds sitting next to each other playing computer games in the past, but then also being passionate about, competition, about gaming, and just like naturally we just kind of find that ourselves in this environment. So yeah.
Nice. And now you sit next to another nerd.
We love nerds here. Nerds are our favorite.
And you said,
absolutely.
You said you started 2015, and what do you think is the main difference back then, 2015, 16, to
it was
today?
13, 14 we started, and then the project started later.
Probably around like 2013 was when I started figuring my way in. Around 2015 was when we started solidifying Esport Coaching Network.
I'm sorry.
And I would say by 2017, at least for me, I was into like a full-time role. And that's kind of the trajectory of like how long it took to get from, hey, we think this could be something, to having organizations at the ready to actually employ performance coaches.
Yeah.
So there was like a lot of like pieces that needed to kind of fit to get that timeline to start moving and getting jobs in place for people.
I see. And besides the role becoming more competitive or really competitive, what do you think are additional differences to 2013, 14?
Oh my God,
I don't
like
even
the
know
best...
if they're comparable.
I mean, yeah, you cannot compare, but like the thing, and probably Isma will agree with me as well, and with Summer, the best thing that could have happened to esport is that we no longer have those bloody gaming houses. Like that was a nightmare. That was something that was a creation where you would just like, rent a flat for the team and just, have people having like, maybe not have, but like let people have their own room, and then there was one living room where there are like 5 computers and a kitchen, and then people were just like living, working, playing and training in one place.
Like your classic startup incubator, like Silicon Valley type thing.
That was the worst. Luckily, when I started working in esport, it was I think 2013 or 14. It was with Rocket, and back then they didn't have their space to like, they didn't have big enough gaming house to put the computers games, so they were renting the office space. And I was just like, God bless they don't have it, because they were forced to kind of walk into the office, expose themselves to daylight, and just like don't be nerds for years. So I feel like that was... I'm so happy that we kind of get over this one, but like for me, that was the biggest thing. I feel like
people are still very tempted to come full circle on that. Like you hear about orgs who like are building out their big facilities and they have like nap rooms in there. They're like, we have an esports facility that you never have to leave. And it's just like, no, please leave it. Leave it.
Like don't work and sleep and do stuff in the same place. Like, yeah, absolutely.
Do not need a nap room. No.
Yeah. But so that's one thing, and I feel like if you compare the players as well, is them recognizing that it's not only about playing the game. It's not only the game itself. It's not only how skilled you are in a game, but how much of a social skills you have, how much of awareness you have, how much of a self-confidence and self-love you have, because that is also important. Whether you do sport or not, whether you care about the people you play with, like these are the little things that people started with time realizing, that you cannot build a team where people are fighting between themselves inside of the team. Whereas when I started, and I remember coming to one of the first teams, people were barely speaking with each other and they hated each other. They were like not even interested in themselves. And I was asking like, hey, do you know if your teammate actually has a siblings? And they were like, why would I know that? And then it's just like, okay, so how do you want to build a team where you actually are not fond of people that are around you? So these were the little steps that now orgs put a lot of stress to create and hire those team members that actually have similar synergy, similar dynamic. They kind of have also more or less similar approach. Obviously, they have to be different because there are different roles that are requiring it. But at the same time, more or less like you see that people have those social skills. And it's like I had so many cases where players were like amazingly skilled in game, but they could not find themselves in the team environment because they were selfish. They could not communicate. They could not cooperate. They could not find themselves in the place where they had to, like, be among people. So those are the skills that naturally people need to live in sport or esport or like business, any environment requires you to have those social skills. And I feel like the second biggest change for me,
that the players, it's like, it sounds really bad, but it was not coming from a malicious place for the majority of players. Like, I can maybe think of like one or two where I can see that selfishness being like really on purpose. But I want to just really point out that like the player that Ula is describing like came to be that because we're getting players that they have found success by violating like literally every social norm that we have for programming our kids, right?
Yeah.
Like, they are coming home, they're not necessarily doing their homework, they're just grinding out in a game, they're not going out and playing with friends, they're trying to find friends maybe in an online setting that are like, friends for a game, but not necessarily friends that they hold. So they're not figuring out these things that a lot of us are just forced into contexts over and over again, where we have to figure out how to be social and how to interact with other human beings. But those people have arrived at the pinnacle of success. Like, they're getting positively reinforced by saying, you are so good at this thing, without ever having touched those things. Why should it become a problem for me now? And it's because you're being paid. But yeah, I just want to make clear, like, it was not a conscious decision by people to just be jerks. It's not like you would find in like some more like narcissistically driven like companies or things like that.
Yeah, and it was usually like 1 or 2 seasons for those type of players, because in one environment they said like, okay, we cannot we cannot compete or have good achievements with the players that do not have communication, or that do not bond, or that with players that are toxic. So usually it's like 1 or 2 seasons, and it's just like, GG. It's like, yeah, we don't want that. And then the opinion, the label that they have, that is going really far away. And then players know themselves, and there's like, no, we don't want him because he's toxic, or because he's having like a poor comms, and so on and so forth. So like, that's what's changed, is that the selection and like the skill set, it's not only about playing the game now, but it's also about like, what do you represent with
people are not
yourself as a
tolerating
person.
toxicity. I think that was an evolution from the player standpoint, the coach standpoint, and the organization standpoint. Because when Ula and I were first starting, I cannot tell you how many excuses an org would make, and like how much blame a performance coach would get for their inability to fix a problem player. It's like, you don't hire a performance coach to fix a problem player. I'm sorry, that player is just a problem. Like, you recruited someone who's like refusing to be workable. And at that point, like, there's not much anyone can do when someone is just willfully denying themselves and the people around them success. But that was a real evolution that had to happen from all of those levels. People had to develop boundaries and understand what their tolerance was for someone who just like understanding like how much talent cannot overcome a lack of interest in being a good human.
And what you're saying is actually true, that all of a sudden, with the recruitment process, sports psychologists or performance coaches, they are now engaged in recruitment process. And then, we also, like, in the orgs I've been working with, I was also part of the recruitment process where I was screening like, hey, this is amazing person with great comms and like super social, but like, that's the person that will never fit here. This is the coach that we definitely should hire. This is the coach that will never find a common ground with the team that we are having right now. So we are also able to assess like, what's the success rate based on like what's available on the market as well. So
we should totally come back to that topic, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Such a good one.
Like all the recruitment we've done with Summer in the past, but also like with different orgs, like that's showing us like how important this role is to find that, that diamond team that will be shining not just for like one season, but like long lasting. Yeah. So yeah.
Before we go into more detail on specific challenges and obstacles, as well as intervention strategies you used, we just slightly touched on issues when the organization is expecting something that you don't want to do, or that you didn't say you want to do. And there was a question from the audience asking, how would you handle it when the organization wants you to work in a specific way that doesn't align with your professional philosophy, or in other words, your approaches?
Oh my God, that happens so often.
It does.
I think expectation setting is like a really big one. Like, you should not accept the job in the first place unless there's alignment with how you're going to execute and what resources you're going to be given in order to execute that. I think it saves both sides a lot of pain. If you are just like really, really transparent with what you can actually achieve from the get-go. Because like a really good example is like some orgs, like if you don't come in and like deliver a presentation weekly, they don't see you doing your job. So they don't believe that you're doing their job, especially like if it's a tougher season where they're not winning. They start looking at everything and getting very confused about what your role is and what you're even doing, because a lot of it is locked behind a closed door with one-on-ones. So they want you to do these presentations regardless of whether or not they're effective or if it's resonating with a player. So then the conversation really has to come like, what metrics would you be comfortable with us coming up with? Or what way can I demonstrate my efforts to you where you can feel more confident that I'm delivering upon what you need? Because I can guarantee you that me standing in front of your team with their eyes glazed over in front of a presentation is not achieving the results that you want, regardless of whether it be win-lose. And then just having that honest conversation with management to get that alignment, like when you're actually going.
And I also like reading the job descriptions at the start, because sometimes like I've been in a situation once where somebody was trying to like hire me for a project, like a couple of weeks project where I was supposed to fix things. But then when I was reading the stuff, I was just like, there are a lot of things that are not within my scope. And, you know, I could take part in the project, but like, hey, that's my job. But these type of things that are connected with, I don't know, like finance or like whatever stuff is like, no, sorry, that's not me. So quite often it's just like the orgs, maybe not now, but like a couple of years ago, there was a approach like that, like, oh, you know, this team is successful and they have a performance coach, so let's hire one. But then nobody would be like diving into like, okay, so who is the performance coach? What if we name the person like performance manager? Can the person can also do management job? So at the same time, I don't know, booking flights for the players or so on. Like, no, this is not how it works. So at some point, a person that is like applying for the job should also know like what is your scope of responsibilities and what you're capable of doing in order to like spend your time productively. And quite often, as Summer said, like a lot of things I talk about with my players, they do not go to my superiors. Like I'm a bridge, you know. I can tell like, hey, you know, I'm handling the team, everything is fine. We are having it, we're holding it, and it's based on the trust. They need to trust me that at this moment I'm doing my best to prepare the team for whatever's coming. But then unless it's a life-threatening situation or unless there is like a really something that can be very damageable to the org or something, and we will have to handle that, I would be definitely the one encouraging the player, just like, hey. And I've had the situation where I actually had to say to a player, like, I feel like it would be okay if your supervisor would know about it and then you could find a solution into it. And those situations require like even blackmailing online. So many players been going through like different type of blackmail because they send a picture to wrong person and then they were blackmailed that it's going to be revealed to someone if this and that will not happen. That's a performance case. You know, the person is just, you know, dying inside, threatened. The person doesn't know what to do, and then the org has lawyers where they can help out. But those are the type of things and those are the type of issues that also happen. And if the player trusts you and if the player knows that you will be able to help out in most situations, they will come to you with those things and they will look for help. And it's actually upon us to decide what to do with a specific situation, whether that's a situation that, you know, I go straight to management and say like, hey, this is what's happening, or I just kind of say like, hey, you know, our org has great lawyers, maybe you should go to our, I don't know, general manager and look for support, because I feel like we all make mistakes, but at some point, you know, it's all about your well-being and how you feel, and those help, you know. So I'm always saying to my players, my role is not about me telling you what to do, but I can ask you a couple of questions and I can direct you what to do to improve yourself, to feel better. So yeah.
And I want to tie it up a little bit. Understanding the job description and understanding how your role is framed and meant to be executed is also there to protect you. You don't want your reputation on the line for someone expecting you to be doing a different job. and not getting that reference for the next job, right? This is gig work for a lot of people where they're operating as consultants. So you don't want to like put your reputation on the line for somebody else's vision that you don't even agree with, right? So it really behooves you as a business person to be able to actually set those things up front. Another big one is like, if someone is expecting you to be able to handle a player who's like so depressed that they're suicidal, that is really not in most people's job description and should not be, at least in the United States. That really needs to be handled by a clinical psychologist. That's the person who's licensed to deal with it. And you can be in really big trouble if you're the person who's been giving this person advice and something really serious happens to them. So it is for your protection to set really clear boundaries around those things, saying the second someone says, I'm self-injuring, I have suicidal ideation, any of those things, like red flags, like, hey, hands off, you need to get them a professional immediately.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot be working with this player until I know that they are in treatment. And that is for my protection. And especially in the US, like, protect yourself around those kinds of things. But something that we can meaningfully affect and have a conversation with the org is, hey, we notice that there's a problem where players are consistently getting burnt out by your program. Players are consistently having issues with anxiety and depression. This is a pattern. I can tell you from speaking with my colleagues that this is happening more often on your org than other places. Then they may start working with you on developing better programming and better trainings for their staff, so that you have a program that's more focused on balance and bringing some level of joy to the workplace, which you may be surprised or maybe not. Like, that is not the focus of most orgs. They will actually really ignore the humanity of their players and staff for as long as they possibly can. And yeah, that's where, we can really come in and say, regardless of what you think we should be doing, this is where I'm going to provide you tremendous value, because you're going to have less turnover, and that's going to positively affect your bottom line.
It will sound bad, but I will also tell that it's also within our role to say no to the org. If we see that the players are flying to third tournament in 1 month and they have not had a break, only like 2 or 3 days, and they're just washing doing their laundry and just like jumping on another plane, it's within our job to say like, hey, no, don't book that tournament. They're tired. They don't want to play right now. Like, you need to make those decisions for the people, because if you don't, then it's natural pressure from the org that the org wants the players to show up. They want the logos to be visible. They want them to participate in as many tournaments as they can. But then you need to teach the org what's the value. Do you want the org just to show up, lose in the first 2 or 3 games and then go back home, or you want the org to the team to perform, to get engaged and to show that they're positive, that they're smiling, that they're rested, that they're enjoying what they're doing? So yes, it is also teaching sometimes your superiors what is okay and what is not okay, how to look after your team. So I would say it's not only being a bridge, but also being sometimes at the shield for the players, like between some of the expectations that are coming. So
that advocacy role is such a tremendous part. Like, I remember my first job on Gold Coin United, and that was my first full-time role. And I can basically tell you that my job there was to argue with the head coach. That was it. He would typically unleash his wrath upon his players, try to shame them at every corner. And when he was going a bit too far, it was my job to take him out of the room and basically argue him to the point of submission and say, hey, you're not going to be successful. You're not going to achieve your goals as a coach if you continue down this path. Here's the evidence. Such a huge, huge part of what we do. Because I think a lot of people kind of take a back seat sometimes, where they're like, I'm here to do this presentation. I'm here to like plan this next workshop. But they really forget that you are the player's protection, in a lot of ways. You're put there to protect the interests of all the working parts. And oftentimes, like, the players are going to be ones that are the most abused because they're not positioned appropriately in the power dynamic. So you're there to offset that. And frankly, like, those imbalances can happen with any of the pieces. The coaching staff can become disempowered at a point where you're trying to resolve it. The management can lose power, like at any number of these things. So it's kind of your job to be the advocate of the necessary interests for the little guy, whatever the little guy is in the time.
Yeah.
And
so
Yeah, sorry, I'll just jump in. And also don't be afraid to kind of fight for your budget, because the team needs bonding, the team needs, support, the team needs something. So like, being a performance coach or sports psychologist is not just, hanging around the players, but it's also preparing all the stuff around that are actually making or securing their well-being. If there is a boot camp, great. Don't let them just to play for 10 days in a row. Like, make sure that they have some proper bonding activities, make sure that they're kind of building stuff. People would say like, yeah, but like if they spend time, I don't know, in some kind of activities or like paintball or karting or something, what's the difference if they play computer games or go karting? That's a huge difference in that. And it's quite often it's just like young people approaching the esport environment, they just don't know what to do in the role. And at some point, if you put yourself as a person like, hey, I'm responsible for the team, and I know what they need, and I know what they're kind of like, what's the best for them at a specific moment, stick with it and follow your instinct, because usually it's a good instinct to just to like, not just to talk and come with the presentation, as Summer said, but just like to get glued, to be a part of the team actually. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So trying to summarize, what I heard was setting clear expectations about your work, know about your competencies, also know your boundaries, and honestly and openly communicate what's going wrong or what you would like to do.
And get a budget.
And
get a budget. Please, for the love of God, get the budget. That's actually a really good point for anyone who is a practitioner. Not just like securing your budget, but speaking from someone who's been in management, it is so important to understand the financial year of your organization. Understand when those decisions are being made. So when I was at CLG, the fiscal year actually started in July. So all of the planning for the entire year from July to June was all going to be happening in the second quarter, right? That's when all those final decisions are going to be made. March was huge because that's when all the initial plannings were going out, all the budgets were being made. Anyone who was going to be hired, fired, like anything is going to be made in that second quarter. So if you're going to make a play for it, you really need to understand, oh, this is when all those conversations are happening. So when you're bringing it up, it's top of mind. If you wait until July when everything's set in stone, there's not a lot of flexibility I can have there until I've been through most of my fiscal year and I can see if I have any reserve funds to then throw towards performance. So understanding how and when those financial decisions are being made is so crucial, because you can make the management's job so easy just by being like, hey, remember when we had this discussion? Oh, you're planning right now? That's perfect. Let's put it in the books. So yeah, I mean, that's something that I only really learned once I started having more in-depth conversations, was in the organization for a while, and I recognized the value of it. And I only doubled down on that coming into the management role, where I really understood, like, yes, this tactic is extremely valuable.
Yeah. Thank you for highlighting this point. We touched on a lot of different aspects, including obstacles, including some ways you work. Maybe to get it more illustrative, could you take us through like a week of your work as a performance coach? How have you worked, well, like one-to-one or team workshops? Where did you provide your support and service? Maybe Ursula, would you like to start?
Well,
Yeah.
Ula, I just want to frame it a little bit. I thought about this because I
Yeah.
think there's two different contexts: the consultants and the full-time.
Yep, that's
so
true.
I think maybe we should take like one or the other. But yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree. And it's also depends, like if you're full-time and if you travel with a team or you just do distance, because like it depends on the role. So I'll focus myself on like being with the full-time where traveling and everything is in there, and probably Summer can take over the consultancy. The thing is that when you're full-time with a team, one thing you need to know at the very beginning, the first 2-3 trips that you go, be like super excited. Yeah, I'm going somewhere, I'm seeing new places and so on and so forth. But then with time, that travels and the packing and just like constantly, living on a suitcase actually, it's getting tiring for me as a performance coach, for someone that is not actively playing. But if you imagine how tiring it is for the team members that are actually on the top of that, working on a high productivity all the time during the tournaments, and they also have super demanding schedule quite often. The key thing is to prepare the best they can their schedule, including everything they need to do. So the more I take stuff off their head, the better for them. So what does it mean to take off? So they go to bed in the evening and they know what's the schedule in the morning. They know that we are getting up at, for example, 10 o'clock, or we meet up at the breakfast at 10 o'clock. Then we have a teamwork, teamwork. Then we have some preparation. Then we have some practice. Then we have, I don't know, lunch. Then we have another block. Then we have a dinner. Then we have a free time, so like cool down moment. And then we have some time off in the evening. So that's the way like you prepare a specific schedule, and that schedule is always a living schedule, especially if they're tournaments, because if there's a day of tournament, everything lives around the tournament. So like, for example, we are now in Cologne, we have more or less every day different schedule. We keep the same blocks, so the players, always go outside for the walk. So players, play some football. The players, have time for the family, for whatever stuff they want to do. But at the same time, that planning and giving them, including in the plan, time off and proper amount of sleep, and always the food schedule, like that's super important, and that's very critical. During also the tournaments, it depends on the team, because when I started, I had far more one-to-ones with the players, where I was talking with them individually about the stuff that I've noticed, that, for example, somebody's having poor communication, somebody is tilting during the pracs, and and I was just trying to teach them, like, hey, do you know how that impacts your team? What would you do if your teammates would do this? Blah blah blah. So just making them aware, and that takes a lot of time. But if you're like with a team for a longer period of time, those things, like, they naturally know it. So at the same time, the schedule is like not so packed, so it all goes down into like what are the needs in a specific moment. So tournament from tournament or roster from roster, probably there's a big difference in like how do we schedule things. But usually
emphasize
Mhm.
how important this aspect of the job is, because for some people it may sound like it's not your job, because it sounds like a manager's job, right? To say, oh, you need to be here at this time and like get from point A to point B at this time. But there's two things happening. One, a lot of the managers are not experienced enough to be able to make those calls, period.
Yeah,
they
true.
need your information to be able to make good, diligent decisions for their teams. Absent you, they will not do it. So if you are if you're at a point where you feel like you may be overstepping, or that manager is pushing back on you, recognize that you are in the right, because you understand the situation probably better than they do.
Mhm.
The other thing is like, because of budgetary constraints from the management side, your role and ability to maximize that time on the ground at a tournament is mission critical. Like, I sent Ula to tournaments with a team manager, and like that team just performed better because she was on top of when they need to be, where she was reminding that manager, hey, like, did you think about dinner yet, when they were in a team activity, right? That is so important, especially because organizations and tournament organizers, like, both will be paying for people's stay and flight. I'm telling you right now, every performance coach out there is like, hey, can we have just one more day? Can we have just one more day so that people can relax when they arrive there? The answer is almost always going to be no. It's a resounding no. For like, those hotel rooms in the places where the tournaments are happening near a convention center, you're looking at $700 to $1,000 a night sometimes for 6 people. The answer is just going to be no. It just completely stomps on a budget for a tournament. So that really impresses upon the performance coach's role of, then how do I make this time terribly, terribly efficient, and to have recovery built in seamlessly?
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, I didn't
Especially
mean to
if you
jump
no,
down that
that's a
toe.
good one. And especially if you travel, to a different time zone, like that's critical. You need to teach them like what time to sleep on the plane, what time to set your alarm clock. Like, try to start getting used to different time zone like 2 days before you leave, right? Try to go like delay your time you go to bed, and so on and so forth. Like, these are the little things that at the beginning when you join the org, like, you teach them, but then it's just like, hey, remember about this, and you just keep it rolling the longer you are with your team. But
We're helping people understand their version of not being their best selves based on what's happening. So like everybody understands like when they're cranky, right? And how cranky looks on them. And when you know you're going to go into a situation where you're just not going to be capable of being your best self, really understanding how that looks, and being able to communicate that to the people around you and say, hey, like I'm not a freaking morning person. You see me at Starbucks in the morning holding a cup of coffee, just leave me alone. Like I'm not going to be nice to you. There's nothing good that's going to happen pre-caffeine for me, right? And being able to have those processing conversations when you're traveling is really important, because otherwise people will take that like very personally and interfere with the team dynamic. And around a tournament, that's the last time that you want things like that to happen. So being proactive around teaching people how to communicate what type of not my best I'm going to be given certain circumstances can be really powerful.
Yeah, and another thing is that quite often you need to teach the people that when they're like at home and doing their own stuff and that they have their own habits, their own routines and so on and so forth, it's totally different that when you're like very dependent on the schedule. So at home, if you have a day off, yeah, you can allow yourself to kind of get up in the morning saying like, I feel bad, it's going to be a bad day for me. But when you have a game day, like you cannot get up in the morning say like, oh my God, I look so bad today. That's going to be a bad day for me. Hey, you're four people in this team are actually counting on you, and there is no space for that. So at some point, these are the little things that you need to teach them. But at the same time, I need to be constantly positive. I cannot show that I'm having a bad day. I need to be like person that is engaging. I need to be person like, hey, what's going on in the morning? How you feeling? Oh, I'm feeling a little bit, under the weather. Okay, so what can we do? Did I get you Starbucks? I don't know, let's go for a walk, let's do this. And like trying to focus this person constantly all the time on like what are the benefits and what are the good stuff. With time, like give it like 1 or 2 hours and I see that the player is coming back to normal, and then all of a sudden he or she is forgetting that, hey, actually I had a rough morning. So knowing the players is actually critical for the work, for the work, for the job, for the work. And the same is a little bit with working online, because when you work online with your team and then they're practicing a specific time, you just jump in. And I heard it from one of the coaches saying like, I don't know how you do that, but like when you leave, the guys, they're just like, going bonkers, like the comms are bad and they're not disciplined. But whenever you come, all of a sudden the comms are perfect, everyone is working. And it's just like sometimes your presence could be a motivator that they know that somebody's looking after you. So, it's usually working around one-to-ones, around this building a schedule, around making sure that they have food, they have sleep. It's also work around individual issues that are quite often happening, whether that's somebody passing away from the family, whether that's, some issues of like, siblings or whatever things that could be happening. We all need to work around it. And if I know my player and I see it and I look at the player in the morning, I see like, okay, something is happening. So we eat breakfast. Do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to talk? Like, hey, I'm here. Usually it's like, no, 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 no. But then 10 minutes later, it's like, hey, what have you been up to? It's like, I'm free. Okay, so let's talk. So the players see themselves that need to kind of vent out a little bit and just like, okay, there is someone that can always, talk with me. So setting those priorities and showing them how important they are, that's another thing. And teaching, that's a big role as well, because there are so many theories that usually when I start working with a team, I introduce like we start with one-to-ones. I'm trying to do the temperature check, like what's going on with the team, what are the issues, and then based on the research I'm doing, I'm preparing like a set of workshops for them. And then we just like have a discussion. So for example, I don't know, like I'm throwing a topic called, I don't know, 4 stages of the team performance, and then we just discuss what's a forming stage, what's a storming phase, what's the norming and performing stages, what are the characteristics, where do you think we are right now, what do we miss. So just like that type of active workshops that are showing them that, oh, actually everything could be named, everything could be measured. And if I only change the tone of voice, my teammate will not be angry at me because he will not take stuff personally. So these are the little things we try to sort out in those team discussions. And at the start, again, once you start in the organization and you have like, you just do the temperature check. There are more of those, but with time, you just limit them because the theory is there. But sometimes you just need to be like a reminder, like, guys, remember, we are now in the performing stages, so we need new challenges. Let's try to find something, or let's try to build around, or like, hey, this is the conflict that we're having. So how do we resolve conflicts? Let's talk about it. So I'm just like,
well, there's a little difference between the traveling performance coach versus the on-site performance coach with regard to the education piece. When you are on the road constantly, the education role becomes what vital piece of education do I need to build vocabulary so that when I need to use the vocabulary on the road in a very quick situation, they will be understanding immediately with few words what I mean and how to execute on it. So you're really focusing your training on the performance day. So as Ula is saying, developing the vocabulary around the difference between a forming versus performing team, right? So that when you can get into that situation, it requires one reference to be able to go. I think you have far more flexibility when you are in one place to have more regular curriculum. And that is a very, very key difference about how the education looks. So like week to week traveling, you may have 1 week where people are on the ground, where that training is going to be remote. You're going to be online. So there's going to be differences in how you're going to reach a player's engagement level when you're on the phone versus in person. But you're doing that with the mind that maybe in 2 weeks, you're going to be on the road, you're going to see that person in person, and you're going to be able to have a one-on-one with them where you can then really connect the dots, because then they're going to be in the situation and it becomes very practical. And to kind of switch gears to the full-time in-person, like on one location, your week is going to be consisting of player one-on-ones. Generally speaking, you want to be on maybe like a 2 to 3 week cadence for checkups with most players. Some players are at the point where they don't really need you except for when there's something happening to problem solve because you've done work with each other for so long. Other players, you may be talking to them every day. But on average, I would say 2 to 3 week cadence is a good check-in for the average player within your organization. So that's kind of built into your schedule and usually worked around the training schedule of the games. My work, especially when I was head of player development, I was working with all the teams underneath an org umbrella. So those are always going to fluctuate based on the different training schedules that are present for each of the games. The other thing is, like, I hold routine coach check-ins. Like, you cannot have that alignment unless you are regularly meeting with those coaches. I would say you should be meeting with the coaching staff at least once a week formally, dedicated times, that it's just so that you guys can get in sync and plan effectively. I think it's really natural for a lot of the coaching staffs, especially strategic coaching staff, to just branch apart from you and try to get like the key learnings and problems sorted out in their realm. And they'll completely forget to include you in those conversations. And most of the time you shouldn't be in those conversations. You need a separate one, even if it's just 30 minutes, just to say, this is what's up with all the players. These are the problems I'm experiencing with this one, right? Let's get solutions for X, Y, Z. So finding that separate time, like mission critical. You also should be doing like practice observations. So even if like there's nothing to be accomplished, you still want to, as Ula was pointing out, sit and observe. Sometimes you're going to see that the quality of practice is just going to increase because then they feel like they're being observed and then now they're performing versus just kind of going through the motions and going on autopilot, right? Which happens to the best of us. So you just being there to observe things is great. And the other thing is like sometimes you just are going to catch things that someone who does not have your trained eye is, can't observe themselves. You are going to be far more tuned into the team dynamics when people are using certain words that are ticking somebody off, but like nobody else has an awareness, right? Like those little moments are really helpful for observations. And then to complete the puzzle, you are absolutely crazy pants if you are not having a regular check-in with the management. Like, I cannot emphasize this enough. Those are the people that are going to make the decisions at the end of the day. It is always going to behoove everyone within the system that you have ridiculously strong alignment there, and that your reporting structures that you've created, however they look for yourself, seamlessly answer the key questions that those managers need to know. They are reporting to someone most of the time, or reporting to themselves and trying to figure out certain things. So understanding that person's mechanisms, what they need to know, and always not even needing to think and already having that information ready and prepared for them on a weekly basis, like makes your job and your effectiveness increase like easily tenfold if you just are very consistent about making sure that that meeting is highly productive. So that's really a day in a life of someone who's on the ground, on site, working full time with a team.
Yeah, I'll just top it up with one more thing.
Okay.
The more routines you have as a performance coach with your team, and the more routines you build your team members, like throughout the day, the more comfortable it becomes for them. Because if you're very chaotic at your work, and if they always have like a different type of a day in the week, a meeting, if you kind of one week meet on Tuesday, the other week on Wednesday, and so on and so forth, it's chaos for them. They're not prepared. And believe me or not, that with time, if you're doing your job well, they will be bringing a lot of stuff to work around for your meetings. So the players will be bringing themselves stuff like internal conflicts inside of the team, or saying like, hey, my coach is not listening to me, or the feedback I got from the coaches is something I completely do not agree. Help me to like talk with him or with her. So it all depends how you like manage your time. But the more structured you are in terms of like, hey, even if you don't want to meet, that's fine. But every Tuesday between 3 and 4 p.m., this is my window where you can always come and talk to me. Like, that's my window for you. Like, that's it, And believe me that first week, maybe someone will not come. Second week, they will tell you like, no, it's all good. But in the third week, they will come and vent out everything. And these are the moments that we live on. Like, these are the moments we need to support the team the most. And it all goes down also, I think we did not mention that a lot of work we do as performance coaches is work with the regular coaches, with the head coaches, with the managers. That's a lot of work that we do. And it starts from communication. It starts from how they speak with the team, how they inspire them, whether they inspire them, how they give feedback, whether that's a constructive feedback or whether it is like, I don't like your play. Are they actually learning anything? Because there have been also situations in my career where the pracs were only about, okay, let's play the game. They were playing a game, and then they were finishing and saying goodbye to everyone. There was no theory, there was no strategizing, there was no summary. The players, they would not even know like what kind of goals they have. Whereas having a goal as an athlete is like the critical, like you cannot live without a goal because you need to know what you want to achieve. So working around those and teaching how useful those things are, this is super important. And like so you cannot say like, hey, being a performance coach is only, supporting your players. It's supporting the whole organization, from management to support to coaches, and like just, making sure the players' well-being are there.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I absolutely agree that it's really difficult to work with players while ignoring the holistic environment of esports, including coaches, including managers. So I really like that you do that. And beside aspects like education, on sleep, on goal setting, on time management, and so on, in general, to me, it sounded like this performance coach is being a good friend or being a nice person. And I really like that. That's my takeaway.
We're not always nice. Trust me, we're not always nice. Sometimes we have very big.
Well, not all good friends are nice either. I mean, unless I just have terrible friends, but
yeah, sometimes
they tell me what's up sometimes.
Yeah, they will tell you like, hey, you crossed the line. Like, yes, you did. So,
but I think it's really important to recognize that the structure that we create, a lot of times, like you'll get pushback on it being present because you're not really sure whether or not it's effective from the management side or from the coaching side. But a lot of times, as I said earlier, these are people who have arrived at their success absent the normal skill set that everybody else has. We understand how to proactively think about situations, where a lot of times these players and coaches have not been in situations where they needed to like do their homework really ahead of time or study before an exam, before like there's a bunch of like crap hitting at the same time. You usually get those skills like when you're in college, where you really have to manage yourself and you have to understand all the things that are coming and really see your schedule, understand where the really intense parts are going to be, understand where you have a light load, right? You're learning all of those management skills and the self-management skills given that context. So it's really important that we create that context as well, that we say, no, you will be having a meeting with me. We will be talking about something. It's going to be more awkward and painful if we're going to sit for an hour just staring at each other. So maybe we can avoid that discomfort. And yes, it is uncomfortable. You should let it sit. And maybe to just avoid the discomfort of having to stare at somebody's face for an hour, maybe I'll just think about something and like be proactive. And now that person is starting to build that self-management skill, and they would not have the environment to build it without you offering that and with consistency. So I would argue that like it's important that we understand that when someone is challenging why we've structured things that we have, that somebody failing to operate within the structure is not an issue with the structure like yet. You should also edit at times, but most of the time it's allowing people time to build the skills necessary to be able to thrive within that structure, because people oftentimes don't recognize that there's an absent skill set. They just take it for granted.
Given that time is running and I'm a protector of the time, I would like to ask you, what is it that you most enjoy about being a performance coach? And maybe you can also combine it with a personal story of yours about success in esports. Maybe also not success, but the difference where you had a memorable experience that you enjoyed. So is there something?
I'll start. I think what I really enjoy most about performance coaching and working in esport in general is like, I consider it such a privilege and so humbling for people to welcome me into their journey while they're trying to struggle to achieve. It's not even that like it's comfortable for them, but that they would really say, this is going to be difficult. You're going to see some of the ugliest parts of me, and I want you there. That to me is a real privilege to have somebody open up to you that way. And it is just not something that I believe that I would truly have in life absent going after a career like this. Like maybe you have hopes of that, like having that level of intimacy with family and friends, but for people who are not really in your inner circle, to trust you to that level is ridiculously rewarding for me. And when it comes to like a memorable success or accomplishment as a performance coach, I would argue that probably what I'm proud of most is being a woman in the space, and being able to survive in a context that wasn't really built for me. When we were talking about gaming houses, I showed up to the CLG compound and I was 5 months pregnant, walking around a house full of dudes everywhere who like really just like could not relate to me as a human being. It was so difficult. And like I consider that such an accomplishment because my presence allowed far more women to feel comfortable coming into the space, first of all. I've really paved the way in that respect for a lot of women behind me, which I'm extremely proud of. But also, those men would not have had someone to honestly learn from in a way that they needed to learn from them if I was not there. They would be able to still hide behind their comfort and not really take the strides necessary to make it a truly inclusive space. And just my presence and offering my perspective a lot of times has opened people's eyes to the value of having someone who's like emotion focused in a room. I think having women around gives an odd permission to a lot of men to talk about things that they wouldn't ordinarily talk about. And this is not a disservice like to any of the men who are performance coaches. I think they're fabulous. I think they do a great job. But I do think that women, just because of how most people are socialized, offer a really nice, unique way for someone to engage with themselves. So I'm really proud of, and I'm sure Ula can identify with, of like just being that person to really pave the way for more people to accomplish this particular goal and have access to the positivity that I've experienced from doing the role.
Yeah, I agree. And not to lie, for me also is like a very humbling moment for me was my first team, the Rocket team, where I kind of stood in front of, it was 7 guys sitting in the room, and I was supposed to convince them that I'm good for the job. I remember that like, tomorrow, like yesterday. Basically, I was just standing there looking at the team, and I was trying to introduce myself. My hands were like a little bit shaky, my voice was shaky too. And I asked them like, guys, so tell me, what do you think is not working for you where I can be of help? And then they started joking around the game, and they were trolling me like with some positions and so on. And I knew the game inside out, and I bounced it back with the comment like, hey, if you play like that, I can guarantee that you're kicked out of the team within the next 2 weeks. And then I remember that the boys were just like clapping their hands saying, ooh, she didn't go bait it. So these were the little moments that I kind of, I recall it as a little success, because like I allowed my instinct to work for me. But right now, what is giving me a lot of pleasure is even like yesterday's situations, or the situations where a few months ago we won the IM Dallas. Uh, I was just like, we want, even though it was just like we were already in playoffs yesterday. We knew that we were just fighting for either quarterfinal or semifinal spot. So it was not a game that was like very, stressful for us. But then once we won the game, I just sat down somewhere on the side, and I was just with the tears in my eyes, actually trying not to show them as much as I could. I was just looking at the team, and I was just like, guys, like you've changed so much over the course of last few months. So for me, that change I see in people, and how much they kind of succeed, and how much they embrace the moment, and how much they change from like being, I don't know, toxic and negative person into like someone that is just celebrating success with the teammates, and they're hugging each other and jumping around. That's for me the cherry on the cake. Basically, that's something that I really enjoy. And uh, and I feel like in this role, you need to understand that performance coach is not a role that you get into the spotlight. It's not a role where you get, you know, um, like you need to like being a little bit behind, and you need to like watching and listening, and just like, seeing how those kids are growing, if I can call it like that. So I feel like that's what's making me really um happy about the job, that I see people around me changing, and with every smile they have, with every success they have, like my glass is getting, full. So yeah.
Yeah, I really like both of your insights into what you enjoy about being a performance coach in esports. And given that we almost at the end of time, my, at this moment, last question would be, do you have any recommendations for like individuals that would like to become performance coaches or enter the field of esports?
So I can go from my perspective and from my beginning. I know that we live in a little bit different generation when I was starting my job. And the expectations from the young graduates and so on, they're like very high, and they want to start a job with the great money and with the best orgs and working around the best people. Um, my advice is, don't start the work without getting experience, because you can do more damage in a team than benefit. So I definitely encourage everyone to, if you're directing yourself into getting to the performance coach role or sports psychologist, that's amazing. But start with being an intern, start with getting gigs, start with working around smaller teams to get an experience, to get the feeling, what does it mean to be responsible for people? Because there are many specialists in our in our environment where they just are not capable of handling the whole heavy situation that they're in, and all of a sudden they jump into the big team and it's overwhelming for them. And then what the team is do, like, hey, we hired a performance coach, and had no support. There was nobody that, that could save the situation. So it's a very demanding job, and you need to get that experience. And without that experience, the job is very heavy. And also try not to expect so much of a big salary. I've been working for 3 years in esports without getting a single penny, just a thank you. But I had to do that to get that experience, to get into the know, to the environment, to the changes, to the differences. I wouldn't dare to take money for something where I would not be 100% sure that I'm capable of doing. Whereas having that slow start, it doesn't mean that you're like useless or worthless. Absolutely. It means that you're learning. And with that learning, you can build more of your reputation, and you can build your career by getting to know to what are you actually capable of. So instead of just demanding from the start, and I know that this is happening, and I also had many, I've received many emails with like requests for being an intern, where somebody would be just saying like, hey, I can be your intern and you could pay me I don't know, like 30 euro per hour. I was just like, where's that coming from even, right? So I feel like be humble, and if you want to change people, start with the right approach, because this is a very responsible job, and you're responsible for people's career. And if you don't know how to do it, and if you don't do it properly, at some point you can do a lot of damage, which is something that with time could be very heavy for the performance coach itself. So get humble, learn from the very beginning, and if you have a pure direction where to start as well with some internship, with some little projects where you learn about people and about the job.
And are you able to quantify that, or in other words, when to know when you are ready?
When you're ready, you will feel it. You will feel it when people will start changing and smiling and just saying like, "Oh, thank you for that. That was amazing." So you'll feel like you're ready. That's definitely coming. But you also feel like you would be able to like give feedback with confidence. You will not be afraid to ask questions, or you would not be afraid to say no to someone that is actually hiring you. So that's the moment when you feel like, yeah, I know what I'm doing.
Okay, thank you. And you, Summer? What would you
Yeah, I
be
mean,
your
just to like
recommendation?
bridge off that, I think that you will be able to feel when you have been able to acquire somebody's trust, and when you've been able to have actual impact as a result of that trust. If you are doing your job and you feel like you're doing it with regularity, you're doing your workshops, you're meeting with the people, cool, but you actually have not been able to achieve that level of connection yet, you're not ready. It's just that simple. Like, I can give you 10 different workshops and you get nothing out of any of them, but I can sit you down and have one meaningful conversation because you trust me, and it completely changes your character. So until you've actually had regular experience with being able to develop that level of trust with someone, then I would argue that you still need to practice how you're connecting with people before you can have a good, strong impact. And a lot of times, like, that's really all it takes, because it's far more important that you have someone who's talented at connecting with people to change their mind. Like, if we consider the theoretical model of behavior change, like that person who can just go from take someone from like not contemplating it to just thinking about it, that is the talent that you need to have. That you can get someone to start thinking about something that they've never considered is literally half the battle, and you need to be able to do that very seamlessly. So yeah, that's just like my comment there. And like, to go off of what Ula said about the damage that you can do, it's not just the damage that you can do to someone's career, you can damage an organization. I've talked a lot about understanding the management, the budget, like you need to understand the business that you're in. And I think that's really important, because I've known a lot of practitioners that they know their degree, they know what they're worth in traditional sport, for example. They try to get that in esport. They sell that they can have that level of impact, but I can guarantee you that you, after that salary on an NFL team, where how many players are you working with? They're A squad, B squad, C squad. But then you go and try to ask for that salary on a team of 5, full of people who have not been primed to be able to work with you, right? Because at least in traditional sport, you are given a lot of exposure to some of these concepts as you've been training, from Pop Warner football all the way up into the NFL. Like, you've been exposed to a lot of these concepts just by being in a team environment. They're ready for you. That's not the context that you're walking in here. So asking for that level of salary where you cannot possibly have that level of impact on your best day, I don't think is fair. And if we look at like the esport ecosystem overall and its current health, it's not as healthy as it was or has the same potential as it did, because I do feel that people really fail to understand the business that they were in, the entertainment aspect for one, for players, coaches. Like, you cannot just tunnel all on gameplay. You do need to consider yourself an entertainer to at least some degree for your organization to be successful, right? And the other thing is that no, we can't just rely on a bunch of VC money to get us by. Like, to some degree, you do need to have a startup mentality still in esport. I think we got really complacent because we saw all these dollars flowing in, but now we're realizing that unless we can really produce something with consistency, like, that doesn't matter. So you need people who are of the mind that they care about esport and its growth, period. Not, and position themselves where it's like, hey, this is what esport can tolerate and afford me right now. I need to go and do something else to allow me to go do this. Like, I worked a full-time job, and like Ula, like, had the same story. And then for 3 years, we tried to toil and figure out, and in our spare time, figure out what to do and how to make this work. Like, with nothing in return. I interned for free. That's how I got my break. I said, hey, Weldon, I know you're being paid for this workshop. Can I come and observe you? And I paid my own airfare to fly out from New Jersey to California to go watch him work. And by the end of that, he's like, I need to go fly back to Finland. Can you take this next workshop? And that was my break. But that was all on my own dime. So much time invested in me understanding everything that I need to know, doing my own training, pursuing people with really valuable information constantly, being a humble learner. Like, that's what you need in order to really succeed and break in to this overall industry. You have to have good expectations, and you have to know what you're walking into.
Yeah, never lose passion and hunger for knowledge, and in a human being, that's the key in this role. Like, you need to have it, because otherwise it's it won't work.
I think that's a great statement toward the end of today's session. Is there anything that you would like to add that you think we haven't addressed?
I think we talked so much today. Hope, guys, you're not asleep, by the way.
I don't think so.
Well, there's two things. One was performance coach's role with the recruiting process. I thought was actually a really important thing to talk about. And I do think that we should talk about, like, succinctly, the key differences between a traditional sport team and a esport team.
Where would you like to start?
I mean, I think the easy answer for the traditional sport versus esport team is that it's going to differ per esport, where the similarities are going to be and where there's going to be differences. But I would also say that, like, you should consider traditional sport as an avenue to inform potential options to solve your problems, but it is one of very, very many. I would actually argue that most esport teams that I've worked with are far more similar to, like, creative teams in a business, because of the level of innovation that needs to regularly happen. So, like, for a game of League of Legends, you're getting new patches coming in, new champions. Like, we're past the point where you can even be a specialist as a player. Like, the generalist players tend to actually succeed the most because they're able to keep up with the meta changes. So knowing that innovation and agility are keys to success in those environments, then I wouldn't argue that traditional sport is the best place to look, because there's so much rigidity in the rules of the game that they're working with that you're not going to get enough skill out of how to create that regular collaboration and innovation on a team. I've actually had conversations with my sister-in-law, who is the head background designer for Rick and Morty. So she's in animation. I've had great conversations with her because she leads a team of creatives that need to constantly innovate and create new things on a constant basis. And that has actually yielded a ton of good information on how to manage that type of team dynamic. So that's what I would really encourage people to think about. Like, yes, like, any of these disciplines can really inform some of the decisions that you're making, but you cannot assume that it's a one size fits all. It's usually going to be, this particular discipline has one useful tool that I can apply to this particular situation.
Yeah. And you don't need to label things like, hey, esport is a sport, sport is not an esport, blah, blah, blah. Like, esport is big enough not to need an esport. It's like sport. It's an independent discipline. Focus on what you can do.
Just high performers.
High performers. Yeah. Focus within what you can do within a discipline, but don't try to overthink a lot of things, because as a human, you cannot just put a label on it. You just need to, like, it's a living thing that it's just working around, and as good as you can get engaged in it and understand the environment, I feel like what Summer says, it all goes down into like how you're going to apply the tools you have.
Yeah, and if it suits your competencies and
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
And to keep it short, I stopped saying anything to that point, but you, Summer, addressed the recruitment process where you argued that performance coaches should be involved. Am I correct?
I think it can go either way.
Okay.
So when I was putting together rosters, what I found is that context is key with regard to how am I going to recruit a specific player? So it's important to realize that all the hoops that you put a player through, which includes maybe an interview with a performance coach, that is going to be part of your recruitment of that player. And for some, especially the higher level ones, like they review that as more barrier to entry than is actually helpful. So if me as management know that I just really want to retain this player at whatever cost, and I don't want them to feel a lot of weight coming into my organization, I may decide to sit a performance coach out of that conversation when I feel reasonably confident that that player is workable. Granted, I have the experience as performance coach, so I know what those issues might be, but I really want people to consider that in the equation, because it's a conversation that needs to be had with your management whenever there's going to be a recruiting round of some sort about whether or not your presence can realistically be beneficial, or if there's other pressures from outside of that system that say, honestly, it's far more important that we just get the player in so they can be under your tutelage than it is for us to block them from coming in. I can learn more from them coming in under you than I can learn from just you trying to screen them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think it's terribly important that a performance practitioner be a part of it when possible, at least for the conversations about how a season is going to work. I think League of Legends is really great for the fact that you get a full off season to plan. And I think your performance coach in that aspect of like planning the culture of the team, how you want it to work systematically, is super important, because then you can inform the coaches on, okay, even if I don't interview them, this is the kind of player that I feel like you should be looking for. This is the type of answer they should be giving you to XYZ question, thing like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there something you would like to add, Urszula?
No, I think Summer covered that perfectly. So I absolutely agree.
Thank you very much.
Good.
We are exactly at the end of today's session. Thank you, Summer, and thank you, Urszula, for joining, as well as the audience and the viewers on YouTube, I hope, at least. Thank you very much. And so that's it for today. Good